Man Up, a program dedicated to inspiring and helping men live lives of heroic virtue. And now, it's time to man up.
Welcome to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. We are broadcasting on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. I am Joe Stopulos, and today I am joined again by Mr. John Bishop as we continue this second part of our first episode in the Heroic Fatherhood series. Let's start in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heroic Fatherhood series, I mentioned during the 300th episode, a couple episodes there, recapping what we've done, where we've come from, where we're going. And I am very proud. I mean that with hopefully in a humble way, if I can, of the work of the fruit of some of these series. I mean, I got a lot, and I had a lot of people come up to me from the Men of the Bible series, the Virtue series, whatever these things are, and I'm hoping this will have same kind of effect where I personally am learning a lot from all of these series that we're doing. And so again, some of it is selfish. I just really enjoy hearing from these people, and it's no different than with John Bishop. Last week, he is like the perfect guy to start the series with, and I think it's important in case you missed the show last week, to understand that John had a really great experience with his own father growing up, a beautiful experience with his own father growing up, and then after college, he took the faith very seriously. He discerned a vocation for a bit, and then he was a focus, and then he got his doctorate, and he spent all this time thinking about fatherhood and masculinity. And I think it's important for all of us to realize as we're talking through this, and I mentioned the end of last show, and John kind of mentioned it in this throughout, but this idea of intentional fatherhood. John stewed on these ideas for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and his father was this example of being an intentional father. And so that was my big takeaway from last week. We'll dive deeper into it today, but I think maybe that is the overarching theme already for this entire series is being an intentional father, to really think about the decisions we're making and how we're going about being a father. So stick around. We're going to head to a short break, and we'll have John Bishop on when we return.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Fitness by Design, your neighborhood fitness studio located in Des Moines, offering PH or fitness classes, private and semi-private training, beamer, and massage. Learn more at fitnessbydesigndm.com, 515-770-3844.
Thank you to our business partner, Big Red Q Quick Print. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. BigRedQ-DesMoines.com. BigRedQ-DesMoines.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Ashworth Vision Clinic. Complete eye exams, contact lenses, glasses, glaucoma testing, and urgent eye issues. 515-440-4610. AshworthVision.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from independent realtor Chris Foster. Chris has served clients with everything real estate throughout Iowa since 2019. 641-891-8178 or online at the number 4 saleia.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Laser Home Services. Catholic owned and operated, Laser Home Services has been providing Central Iowa with electric, plumbing, heating, and cooling services since 2001. Learn more at laserhomeservices.com.
Iowa Catholic Radio would like to thank our business partner, Dino Storage, 2725 2nd Avenue in Des Moines, offering monthly rentals, indoor climate-controlled storage, and package delivery to your unit. Learn more at dinostorage.com.
Support for programming provided by Dr. David Ball at Des Moines Eye Surgeons, your total eye care specialist, specializing in cataracts and glaucoma care. Des Moines Eye Surgeons, 515-225-3546 or dmisurgeons.com.
My help comes from you. You're right here pulling me through.
Welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. Excited today to be joined again this week by my friend John Bishop, President and CEO, as I said last week, of Forge. Had a really great conversation last week with John, and I got to recap a little bit of it to say that we're starting the series here on heroic fatherhood. I couldn't think of anyone better to have on than John. His background, his doctoral work in this space, and then also the example he had of his own father, who's also a mentor to me, So if you missed last week's episode, I strongly encourage you to go to the podcast and listen to it. We covered a lot of great ground there. Really, again, giving John's background and then his experience with this great father he had growing up. And now we're kind of transitioning, John, into your own fatherhood.
Oh, boy.
Don't screw this up, buddy. So obviously, we talked about this last week. You have children that are basically 3, 1, and about to be born. I'm sure you've changed a lot in 3 years, and how you fathered has changed significantly. Can you give us a maybe how has your worldview changed in the 3 years you've been a father?
Oh, man. So I remember when I found out that I was a father for the first time, right? So
it's a crazy moment, right?
It is.
It is a wild moment. It is a moment.
It is a marker in,
by the way,
I think, any man's life.
All the next ones you don't really remember near. It is the first one is a arrow.
Oh yeah, I walked around in it. We found out in the morning, took the pregnancy test, and I remember I went to work that day. I was working at the Focus headquarters, which is kind of in the mountains in Colorado, about 7,500 feet, and there was kind of a haze on the mountains. And the haze on the mountains kind of matched this. Like I felt like I was just walking around in a daze, throughout work all that day. It changes you, and it can't be understated. Maybe here is a good place to start. I think that there's a way in which fatherhood fathers you. That's how you might say that. Fatherhood fathers you. That I was slightly older than some people when I got married. I got married at 30, and I'd had a lot of experiences that, were deeply formative. I'd been to seminary. I'd been in Focus staff for many years, been praying for a long time. And the way in which becoming a father almost demanded virtue out of me, because I had a sense that if I wasn't the kind of person that I was supposed to be, I was diminishing the likelihood that my kids would be the kind of people that they were supposed to be. And that hit me. That had been true with my wife for many years, right? But it became all the more true, and for whatever reason, I felt it more when I knew that there was an infant coming. And if I showed up and I had my game face on, I was ready to go in fatherhood, that was going to concretely impact that little baby's life, right? So that little baby is now 3, and I still have a lot of problems that I'm working on.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be perfect. This series will not be about the perfection of fatherhood. It is the striving for greatness, I would say. It is interesting. A couple points there. The first off, that the feeling when you're sitting there and it's like, I've created life. I mean, it is a shift in your life. You have a seismic shift in your life. You're like, what? How?
Yeah.
Crazy. Like it was I'm growing. And I had this it's time to grow up moment. Like it felt like boom,
right.
It's time to be a man kind of thing. But it's interesting, and back to your point there about I now have this responsibility. I think that's maybe the first starting point of becoming a heroic father, which is like I have to embrace this thing, right?
Right.
If you continue to live the life you lived before being a father, you cannot be a great father. Fatherhood is the most selfless thing you can do. Being a good husband, being a good father, that is giving of yourself, laying your life down for your family. That is what
right.
you're called to do. And it's really hard to do that if you're still playing 2 hours of video games a day, if you're still, eating terribly, and you're still, whatever these things are,
right?
Whatever habits you had when you were in college, if you continue to do those things as a father,
if you can, let me say this, not to cut you off.
No, go for it.
If you continue to do those things as a father, you are hurting your kids.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
It's not like you. There's, I think what's the most challenging thing for me about fatherhood is the constancy of it. So like there are a lot of hard jobs out there.
Yeah.
And I think I work pretty hard, but perhaps the deepest thing about fatherhood is that like since I became a father, I have never not been on the clock.
Get a break.
Right? It's always there, so you live in a state of being a father. And in fact, you will be for all eternity.
Yeah.
It's not it doesn't even end at death. Like it stays. And like so sometimes when single friends call me and they're just like, "Hey, can you just like tell me when you're working and we'll hang out outside of work?" It's just like No, that's not how it works anymore.
Yeah.
There is no time of day in which I am not at some point in a relationship with a being who is entirely dependent on me. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take time with your buddies. You need that.
Well, I was going to say, so part of it is, and this is where, and this is probably a Bo and Jeannie comment. It was from early on in our marriage. where it's not 50-50. It's 100-100, right? Your marriage has to be 100-100. It has to be you trying to outserve your wife in some capacity. Like you're all in, both of you 100%, nonstop. And if one of you is only at 50 and the other one's at 100, that's a problem. My point on that is if taking a break and going out and having drinks with the guys, that's not giving 100. That's saying, okay, I am a human being that needs social interaction with my friends. Now, hopefully, those interactions with your friends, and this is where I've changed significantly since I was 24, my social interactions with my friends, our conversations almost don't deviate from the church and like philosophy and theology now. It used to just be sports the whole time, and now it's much more higher. And so my point is, even when I'm having guy time, I'm still being filled up in multiple buckets at the same time. Yeah. But that's still important, right? So now,
very important.
Now it's back to a balance. So if you're doing it every night, if you're going out for cigars and scotch every single night, less of a balance, not so great, right? So again, there's a healthy balance there, but I think that's a great point.
Maybe you can get back there when you have adult children,
yes,
and you have cigars and scotch with them.
Right? Now you're doing two things at once. You're really getting after it.
This is how I father as a grandfather.
Next level fatherhood.
I'm looking forward to that. That'll be
great. Someday. We're not quite there. So that's again your point of like it never turns off. This is why I think hopefully this series we will be helping people to fully realize that. I think it happens so quickly, right? I mean, just boom, 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 and then life happens, and it's easy. This is I quote Socrates, right? The unexamined life is not worth living.
Yeah,
and so it's the same thing with fatherhood. If you're not examining your fatherhood, if you're not examining what's going on and being intentional on all this stuff, it can just happen. And this is where I use this line with some frequency. People are like, oh man, parenting is hard. I'm like, no, actually, parenting is really easy. You can just put them all in public school or Catholic school. You can give them iPads when they come home. You don't have to do anything. Being a good parent is hard.
Right.
Being a parent in today's world, people just throw iPads at kids. They feed them junk food and they send them to school and they never talk. That's easy to do. You just had sex and you had a kid. And now you're making the kid.
Right. And you just you plug them in, and if you have enough money to finance the operation, then they can just flow through.
Yep. Or conversely, being a good parent, being an intentional parent is very, very difficult. So I think there's
it'll change everything.
It changes everything, right?
Yeah. And I think, this is, I always worry whenever I say things like this, give talks like this, that people are going to hear that and they're just like, well, I'm done. I'm not even going to try because it's so hard. I was speaking, this was a couple months ago over the summer, to a man I admire, a very successful attorney at probably the world's largest law firm, senior partner in that law firm, also has 9 kids, 4 of whom are celibate and Opus Dei. The others are married. Just an incredible man, and also an incredible father. But he was talking to me about his weaknesses, particularly a weakness that he had. He was a very passionate guy. Struggled with anger throughout his entire time that he was raising his kids. And this guy says to me, he says, I think that fatherhood, if you do it rightly and prudently, can baptize even your weaknesses. And this is the point that he made. He said, hey, so my kids saw me sweat to become a better dad. They saw me really be, bleed myself dry so as to improve, though I still failed. And so for him, he said, especially as adults, my kids who now saw me become angry and then subsequently saw me in front of those kids apologize to my wife and then apologize to them. Even my wounds, even my weaknesses became baptized and became a source of positive formation for my kids, but only if you are sold out and giving those weaknesses over and striving for improvement. So I think that's the lesson. That's encouraging for me. Doing what I do, I meet these Delta Force Navy SEAL dads, who are just jaw-droppingly impressive as fathers. And I met one this summer, and that was an encouraging point to me that even in the ways that I screw up, if my kids see me with tenacity going after my faults, even my faults are a source of positive formation for my kids.
That's incredible. Yeah,
you see that?
And I would say that I ask for forgiveness for my kids with impunity. I mean, if I lose my temper on them, there is, and this is not something I did when I first started, right? When I was first getting into it, right? It's a matter of you have to step back and play Monday morning quarterback. You have to. So I had Matt Burke years ago he was a Super Bowl champion. He talked about how on Mondays we have to go and watch if I missed a block or I missed a play, we have to watch that in front of all of our friends.
Yeah.
And then we have to talk about how we're going to get better. We have to do that same thing in our own lives. We have to spend Monday looking back. How did I discipline this child? Well, they saw me lose my temper. Did you apologize for that afterwards? Did you go to them and say, I am so sorry for losing my temper. Please forgive me?
Yeah.
And that to your point, my weakness, my short temper can be an opportunity for them to say, well, Dad is asking for I have power to forgive my father for him. And so I think that's hopefully a teachable moment. Hopefully I'm doing it less and less and less, and I'm going to confession less and less for all these things.
Yeah.
But the point is, I think it's really great to say, even your weaknesses can become strength. So I got a handful of questions I got to hit you on.
Great.
You've obviously studied this and thought about this a lot. Where do you think fathers, whether Catholic or not, where do you think fathers are falling short most often today?
Distance. Let me explain that. I think, and I have 5 or 6 hours of reasons why I think this. But
we might just do an entire John Bishop series next year. Let's go for it.
Let's not wish that upon the listeners here. So I'm gonna talk about what I call the sin of masculine distance. Okay, there's a way in which male psychology is geared towards things external. It's in there building things, right? Philosophy, things that are sort of like out there in the ethereal world. Whereas there's a way in which not all, but many women more naturally focus on the person. And when we're threatened, when we're wounded, men flee to what you might call interpersonal distance. They're more comfortable just going out and working in the garage, right? Yep. Doing stuff in the yard, burying themselves in their profession. The brilliance of fatherhood and the brilliance of masculinity only becomes operative and most fruitful when it enters the interpersonal domain. So only when fathers are eye to eye with their kids, right? When they're telling their sons, good job, you're good at that. Or, son, I'm proud of you. Or appropriately when they're vulnerable with their kids. Everybody talks about men are providers and protectors. That's true. There's something deeply good about that. A good father is also is not only a provider and a protector. A good father is somebody who's at play, who's willing to enter the intimacy of their child's play, and form them in that way. If you're a distant dad, and even if you're burying yourself in your kid's athletic accomplishments, but you're not willing to form a relationship with your child, I would say that the sin of male distance is, I think, the sin that you see most frequently today.
So just get 30 seconds tangibly, how would I do that? Like what are some of the things you should start implementing in order to get to this, away from the distance? And
spend one-on-one time with each of your kids on a weekly basis. That's rough.
Yeah.
That's a big challenge, especially if you have a lot of kids. I was talking to a guy named Michael Moynihan a few weeks ago, who's the father of 11 and has a very demanding job at a high school, all-boys high school called The Heights outside of D.C., and he said, I made a resolution a long time ago to spend intentional time, even if it's only 10 minutes, with each of my 11 kids every week.
Wow.
And forming relationships with them in that way.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So, it comes back to this intentional fatherhood thing. I think that's what we'll need to, we'll end with that because I want to hear more about this book. Boys versus girls. I know you're new into this, but you've researched it enough. As a father, being a heroic father to boys and girls, how does that look differently?
Not to use the name of my own organization again, boys need to be forged. Yeah. Girls need to be cultivated. Okay, so there's a way in which women step into maturity more naturally than do boys, and there's a lot of reasons why I think this. Boys are more susceptible to culture. Okay, they're more brittle in a way. Masculinity is forged in culture, whether it's the culture of your family, culture of your friends, culture of your parish, your school, what have you. The culture in which your son lives, the stew in which he is made, is critically important for his flourishing. And so doing things like giving your son firm direction, having him raised in a community of friends, giving him examples of positive masculinity, because your boy wants to be a man. And if he only has examples of what you might call, quote unquote, toxic masculinity in his mind, he would rather be a toxic man than no man at all. So if you don't have within your boy's mind an image of a positive male figure who's deeply masculine and something to which someone to whom you can aspire, then you're doing him a disservice.
And on the girl side, I would say, and this is Dr. Meg Meeker, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. If you haven't read that book, if you have daughters, you should definitely read that. But if they want to marry someone like you, and if you're not a strong father and you don't give them a strong example, they will go looking.
They will
for it, right?
still want to marry somebody like that.
So you've got to be that role that they need to have a father role in their life. And so again, that intentionality with your daughters is equally important. Okay. How does a heroic father discipline his children?
Yeah. He disciplines while simultaneously affirming. Okay, so I had a good conversation with a friend of mine who's been here in Des Moines, Dr. Matt Bruninger, out of Steubenville University. And I was on a Zoom call. My daughter ran into the Zoom call and just started screaming. I have a basement office, okay? And she wanted me to do something. I think she wanted a dessert or something like that. And I responded kind of just like knee-jerk to my daughter saying, Tally, stop it. That first thing out of my mouth. And Matt Bruninger, in the midst of the Zoom call, stopped me and said, John, can you try that again? Hilarious. And can you affirm your daughter while simultaneously directing him? Just like I got parenting advice from him over Zoom right then. And he said, John, how about you say something like, Tally, I can't wait to be with you soon. And I can't wait to play with you outside or whatever it is that she wanted to do. Give firm direction after that. Tally, it's not appropriate for you to open my office door and to come and barge in here. It's also not appropriate for you to yell at me. I'm your dad. You're my daughter. Okay, they need to know that you're the authority. But can you simultaneously affirm while doing that? I think that's something that I personally have been chewing on.
Well, I will say this. My wife, and I probably mentioned this show before, she made a very what I thought was profound comment one time that was everyone needs to have 3 kids at least, because at first you think your 2-year-old or your 3-year-old is terrible because you're a bad parent, and then you have another 2-year-old or 3-year-old and you think, man, I'm a really bad parent. And then by the third time, you're like, oh, this is just the way 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds act. Like, okay. Then you can, I am so much better with my 2-year-olds today than I was with the first 2, because now it's like, oh, you're just a 2-year-old. Like, that's
what you do.
This is what you do. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
All right, we have 1 minute left on this side, and then I want to keep you around to talk about resources, books and whatnot.
Yeah.
Last piece, maybe 1 minute on just what is the best piece of advice if a new father comes to you or someone who's in the middle and wants to be a good Catholic father, what is that arrow that you think is the best piece of advice you can give to a father?
Yeah. Have a vision. Okay, so sit for a moment and think about this. When your daughter or your son is getting ready to leave the home at age 18, or they're at their wedding day, okay, and you think, okay, the wedding day is better. I'm now passing the generational baton, so to speak. Could be that tonight if my child is conceived, my grandchild, okay. What do you want your son or your daughter to know, to have experienced? What habits do you want them to have built by the time they reach the altar? That's a hard question. It's one that I'm wrestling with right now. But if you were to take an hour and have drinks with some of your buddies, or more appropriately, have a glass of wine with your wife and talk about that question, and then work back. What do I want my 3-year-old daughter, where do I want her to be? Let's say she gets married at 22, she gets married young. In the next 19 years, what do I want to have formed in her?
I think that's beautiful. Keeping in mind, you only get her for the next 15. She's gone.
That's right.
All right.
And then she's at college, and she's whatever.
We're already like, oh my gosh, we're over halfway with our oldest. Over halfway. All right, we're gonna head to short break. That was great. I love that last piece of advice. We're headed to short break. I'll keep you on for the third part of this conversation to talk about resources and ways you can give things to men to equip them to be the great fathers that they are called to be. We'll head to short break. We'll be right back.
Support for programming provided by Dr. David Ball at Des Moines Eye Surgeons, your total eye care specialist, specializing in cataracts and glaucoma care. Des Moines Eye Surgeons, 515-225-3546 or dmisurgeons.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Des Moines, where empowering individuals and strengthening families have been the cornerstone of care for a century. Services for neighbors in need include a food pantry, professional counseling, emergency family shelter, and refugee resettlement. At Catholic Charities, lives are transformed and you can be part of the mission. To learn more about how to help Catholic Charities fulfill Christ's promise of help and hope, visit CatholicCharitiesDM.org.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, motivated by a sense of compassion for those struggling with poverty, loneliness, illness, family problems, and many other difficulties. Our Catholic faith inspires us to action, sustains our commitment, and challenges us to become more like Christ. For Vincentians, every encounter with our fellow man is an opportunity to share a spark of the divine fire as we walk with them in their daily challenges. To support their mission of helping others and help themselves, visit svdpdsm.org.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Mercy One. We all want to live our best life. That's why Mercy One offers compassionate, personalized care when and where you need it. Schedule online at mercyone.org.
Support for programming comes from Klein Electric, a local family-oriented electrical contractor, a 100% employee-owned company with branches across the Midwest to provide comprehensive electrical services. Klein Electric is able to help with any residential and commercial project. Learn more at kleinelectric.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Caldwell Parish Funeral Home and Crematory. Caldwell Parish offers services that are unique to the individual while following the Catholic funeral rites. Caldwell Parish Funeral Home and Crematory, Des Moines' only Catholic-owned and operated funeral home.
My help comes from you. You're right here pulling me through.
Welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. Still joined with John Bishop. John, the last thing you mentioned about being intentional and thinking back right from the wedding day, and I talked about working from your obituary back. Where do you want to be? How do you want your life to go? I said John Ricardo's talked about working from good golfer. Tiger Woods doesn't just try to get up there and shoot it. Where's the hole at? Where do I want my approach shot to be? How does my drive need to go? I think the same thing in the small time we have with our daughters and sons is really interesting and super thoughtful, especially as I'm already halfway over my 10-year-old's. She's almost 11. Gosh. So. You'd mentioned Intentional Fatherhood by John Tyson. I'm going to get this book. Thank you for recommending that. Any other resources you want to recommend as men are trying to become the best fathers they can be?
Yeah. Well, I think I'd maybe take the last parting pieces of advice in this direction. So take control over your life. And I think perhaps the best thing that you can do to take control over your life and become an intentional father, an intentional person yourself, is to cultivate a daily prayer life. I think a lot of the best fathers who I know are the kind of people who are specifically beginning each day with a time of silence with the Lord. Those are the guys who are able to be intentional because they have the space to do so. I mean, if you're the kind of guy who's up early in the morning, you're spending some time with the Lord before the hustle and the bustle of the day, and everyone in the world, your job, your kids, your wife, kind of just takes over in a way. You can sort of Stephen Covey style, always be sharpening the saw and always getting better. And the second piece of advice that I would leave people with is to intentionally cultivate a group of like-minded men who will father with you. We spoke in the first episode about my dad and his friends, and I think that any dad, it would behoove you to have people who can go into it with you and who can father right alongside you. Okay, that's critical, I think, to the success of any father.
That's awesome advice, and I think it's interesting because I'm looking for book recommendations, and I think what your point is all the books are great.
There's a lot of
being
books
a man
out there.
of prayer,
right,
every day.
And a man
paramount.
who has good friends.
I think that's awesome. All right, yep. John, thank you for joining us for these 2 episodes. We'll have you on again soon. I know, man. I'm pumped up. Go to forge.org, right?
myforge.org.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for joining me on Man Up.